Hey guys, I'm Brian. I've been a mechanic for a lot of years and I've done a lot of pre-purchase inspection on cars, and I worked at a dealership. I used to go through all of the auction cars and all the trading cars. I know exactly where to go to look for damage, for flood damage, for all that kind of stuff. In light of Hurricane Ian, there's going to be a lot of cars on the market are going to be flood cars. In this video, I'm going to help you to understand the scope of damage that can happen from having a car be flooded, and I'm also going to talk about ways to mitigate that damage. If you've got a car that's been flooded and your insurance isn't going to cover it and you need to just basically make lemonade out of your lemon, I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm not going to get into every step-by-step, but give you the basic concepts. The number one thing, the number one mistake that people make when their car's been flooded is they try to start it. And whereas maybe it wasn't damaged beyond repair before in terms of that particular component on the car, it will have damage if you start it and there's still water in certain places. Those certain places are your cylinders. Pull your spark plugs out. If you pull your spark plugs out and crank it over, that water is going to just jettison Old Faithful style right out of those cylinders and not bend or break your connecting rod or your engine block. I've seen that. So if it's in the cylinder, there's a name for that. It's called hydrolocked. I have a video about that in the description. You can watch more about that. The other thing that can cause a lot of damage is having your oil or transmission, especially transmission fluid. If you have water in there because of the vent hose or something, because the water got above the windshield line, basically you can drain the water out and prevent most of the damage. No, it is true that you can flush it and change the oil and change the oil and change the oil, but you will save so much time and money and so much frustration by draining those things first. So pull the spark plugs out and drain your transmission and your oil pan. The water will come out first if at least you get the water out. Say you're out in the bush and you need the car to work and you're like, come on baby, it's like Survivor Island. Drain it until the water comes out, put the plug back in, and you can at least do that. Pull your spark plugs out, Old Faithful stuff out of there, and then you may be able to just get going again. On Top Gear they did Toyota Hilux, and that's basically what they did. Pull the spark plugs out and just make that happen. So share this video with your friends. Let's get into it. Let's get to the nitty-gritty. If you have a good attention span, you're going to learn a lot. I tried to make this really concise and concentrated with good information. So you're welcome. I've been getting messages and activity on these videos. I had a guy named Neil Richardson reach out to me. He's in Arcadia, Florida, in Central Florida, and they had water backup, fresh water backup. And so he was asking me all these questions. I'm like, I should do a video on this. So here it is. Basically, a hurricane has hit Central Florida. It's pretty significant flooding there, and some of the states on up the coast. And there's a lot of flood damage. You see pictures of cars that are just flooded all the way up to here. And there's some significance about that. You've got these wire harnesses, and there's corrosion that can happen. There's all of these little pins. This is a cruise control computer. It's a really simple and small computer, but look how many connections it has. It's connected into the brakes and a whole bunch of other systems on the car. This is located in between the seats and forward, and instead of having a lot of waterproofing, it's on a Toyota, it just has this little thing that goes over. It's like a spill cover, but in a flood, water would ingress all over into this computer. My advice in previous videos that I did one in 2011. You see this is all open to elements. And it was the title of it was Why You Should Not Buy a Flood Vehicle. I've fixed flood vehicles where they've ingested water into the engine. So that's what it sounds like. It's just locked up and it's just a real hard, nasty noise. Specifically hydrolocked vehicles. I did a Jeep, busted knuckle, buddy Matt, he's bought a Jeep and got a really good deal on it. And all it needed was a starter motor. And so it can be done, but at the same time, there are so many computers that it's not just like driving around in a tin can like people say. You have a computer area network where you've got your battery in the trunk or wherever it is. They're often mounted lower than they used to be when they're under a seat or in the trunk, and they can be affected by the water more, especially corrosion, but also shorting. When you have a flood, you have a lot of contaminants, a lot of mineral deposits or salt or calcium in the water, and it conducts electricity. If you were to take a jug like this is distilled water where it's been evaporated and it leaves all of that stuff behind to where you have pure water, you can't get any kind of signal on that. It won't have any continuity across it, and it won't conduct and create all kinds of goblins electronically in your car that you might get otherwise. So with all of these computers, you've got a powertrain control module, you have an instrument cluster, it has a circuit board in it, you have door computers, cruise control computers as mentioned, a safety restraint system computer, and a body control module. And all of these are wired together in the car with copper wire that's prone to corrosion. So the first thing you want to do if your car's been in a flood is you want to combat condensation by getting the windows down. This can be tricky because if your electric system is just shot, it could be difficult. So you just open the doors. Don't worry about the windows. You want to get air moving through it, because the first thing that'll happen is condensation. The whole car basically, say it was only flooded to here, when it sits out in the heat, it becomes a biosphere, like those little environments that are contained in a bottle, and the hot and evaporation will cause that moisture to get everywhere. The moisture's bad. It's not as bad as the mineral-rich content down
so
here.
the reason why this one is a flood vehicle is the front of it went into the lake or the river or something. It got flooded. So basically you see all this sediment, all of this brown stuff in there. It's now creating havoc with all kinds of stuff. See, look at the water line. As I pull this carpet back, and this is how you can check a vehicle to see if it's been in a flood. You can see that there's a line, like a very distinct line where the water was. So this is the airbag computer, and we've replaced that because it's been a problem in the past. It was always throwing fault codes and stuff, but it's still throwing some fault codes. And part of that is this ground here, but another part of it is just the plugs going into it. So we're going to clean those out today.
But it is still bad, so you want to get the things to dry out as good as you can. The next thing is contamination. Anywhere you have that moisture in the headliner or anywhere else that can propagate from there, such as mildew, mold, bacteria, all of those things can make the car stink and make it unusable unless you have great expense. Headliners can be very expensive, even used headliners can be. They're difficult to ship, they're difficult to move around, so doing that first thing is the condensation. The other form of contamination that we get is in the oil and in the transmission fluid. When it's just sitting there, the water is much more dense than transmission fluid or oil, and so it goes to the bottom in the oil pan. You may have heard oil and water don't mix. It's in a lot of expressions of speech, and it's in science that oil and water are non-soluble. They don't mix. But when you run them through gears or with a blending process or they're whipped together, they definitely mix. Anybody that's had a head gasket failure where antifreeze and oil were mixed together would find a substance that was homogeneous. It's all the same, and it's light brown. It looks like chocolate milk. It doesn't look like oil. It doesn't look like water. In a transmission setting, you would have the same thing, but it would look like strawberry chocolate milk because of the red fluid and the water. It doesn't look like transmission fluid, doesn't look like water, but it's a homogenized mix. When that mixes and propagates throughout a transmission especially, it gets into a torque converter, it gets into your clutch packs, and it gets into all of these other small little detail areas where it would be very difficult to flush and very difficult to get rid of. Transmission fluid, it has properties to help prevent corrosion. When you open up even an older transmission, as long as there's no water in it, it looks like brand new. All the metal looks great. It might have dust from the clutch packs, but otherwise it lasts really, really well. So the next thing you want to do if you got the doors open, all that stuff, is you want to drain out the water. When you pull a drain plug or if you drop the transmission pan, you'll find that most of the water is contained in that. It doesn't evaporate because there's oil or transmission fluid sitting on top of it, displaces it. Now another thing to consider is you've got a dipstick that goes down in here. A quick easy test, let's say our dipstick goes here. If it's way up above full but you didn't add anything to it, there's a good chance that there's water underneath that has put it up. And some of the water, if it were to come in, for example, through your vent, it could be in other places of the transmission, and it could be having condensation. So the better you can get that out, and the sooner the better. In English, we have a saying or an idiom that is, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So a pound is 16 ounces, so it's 16 times better to prevent a problem. So if you have a vent, for example, like on a 5R55S, and the vent is from the back and it goes up to the bell housing, that's a really great way to have hot air get out. Or if the fluid's overfilled through the standpipe, it makes it look like the leak's a mess. What I like to do is take that transmission hose and drape it down the side of the transmission and secure it, either with a zip tie or a bolt or something like that. And that way, if you have water raising up the car, it gets above the transmission, instead of letting all the air out and letting water seep in, it works like a cup. If you've ever washed dishes in a basin or a bowl, and you put the cup in this way, with the opening facing down, water doesn't rush in because the air can't get out, and the air displaces where the water would otherwise be. With your hose pointed down, whether it's on your differential, on your off-road rig, or your transmission, or any other thing like a bellows on a power steering, you have those boots on each side and then a tube between, and that keeps the water out. Cars are designed to go through puddles and rain and be impervious to water, and more so. This computer, however, from a 97 Toyota, it has holes all around the outside, and then there's no sealing on these wire harnesses. Newer computers and newer cars fortunately have a lot of these silicone seals that help to keep water out. They're very energetic and lively. If you handle them, you really got to hold on with both fingers. But you see, this has kind of a triple seal, but on this side it's kind of flat, but when you put them together, it pushes down on it and it buckles. When you look on the back side of something like this, it has the same kind of seal in the back. You can see one of two has been installed here. And then this is what it looks like. It's got that same triple seal. This actually goes on the wire on the back side of the pin. The whole point is to protect the vulnerable metal parts that are prone to corrosion. If you do have a flood vehicle, what I would recommend is do these things, and if insurance is going to total it, and oftentimes they will, because the corrosion takes the longest. Now, what can you do to avoid corrosion on your stuff if your car's been flooded and you don't have good insurance, you have liability only? How can you salvage all of these computers? First, get a diagram and know where the computers are. Second, pull them out of the vehicle. A lot of people that buy up all of these insurance cars, they'll take out the head unit and they'll try to dry it with a blow dryer or something of that nature. The best way I know of to get all of the moisture out of parts that are inside of here isn't just to take out this screw and pop it open, but to vacuum it. Not with your Dyson vacuum cleaner or Hoover vacuum cleaner, but to use an evacuation pump like we do in the automotive world for air conditioning. So the way to do that is to create a chamber, or you repurpose something that will work for it. What I'm talking about is something with a thick wall, something that has a seal on it, and some type of a hole. What comes to mind, and I haven't done this, but it comes to mind, is those great big iced tea things, lemonade or whatever. They're glass, they got that big heavy lid, they don't get knocked over easy, and then they got a spout. So I'm saying rig up something to where you can do your AC fittings in the spout so you don't have to drill a hole through glass or do something that requires special tools. The other thing you can do is just use a tank or something that's already set up like that, like a pressure cooker or something that's robust. If you can get a pressure cooker at Salvation Army or a thrift store or something cheap, dude, that would be great. That'd be perfect for that kind of thing. Drill your hole and evacuate that. That thing's made to take the pressure. If you use something like a 5-gallon bucket, like a Home Depot one, I've tried that. It doesn't work very good. It pretty much wads it up like a newspaper. There's a lot of other things that you can do outside of evacuation. Some of those things include getting a bucket of rice. Now, why are you obsessed with closing stuff off and having it in its own space? The reason why is it creates a smaller system, a smaller environment. If you live in a humid climate like Florida, Arkansas, anywhere back east basically, or Hawaii, it's really humid and it's going to be a real hard thing to get anything to dry without partitioning it off like that. Also, besides rice, putting rice in it, you know, rice is really small when it starts out, everybody knows that. And then it expands because it absorbs it. When you boil it, it happens fast. Another thing you can do is use desiccant filter stuff on the same stroke of air conditioning and evacuation. This is like a receiver dryer recharge or refill for a car, and it's double bagged and sealed up so the atmospheric moisture doesn't get into it until it's time to go work in an air conditioning system. And in the oil and refrigerant and everything going around, this still finds the water, absorbs the water, takes it out of play so that it doesn't freeze and cause your air conditioning to have, you know, like a frozen expansion valve or a frozen orifice tube or something of that nature. So anyway, there's so much cool science. There's one other thing, if you want to try this, I've seen this done, is, you know, like those cake display things, those big heavy glass deals, put it out in the sun and let it greenhouse and let all the moisture and the heat and whatnot take all of that and go to the top. So for example, if I were to do it with our cruise control computer that we have here, I would have all of these openings and this plug, the electrical plug, facing up. I'd have it sitting like this, put the dish over the top of it and let it get hot, and then when you see the droplets or whatever, pull it off, wipe out the droplets, and then restart it. And then when you don't see droplets anymore, there's a good chance that you're dry and good to go. You know, like I say earlier with the blow dryer, there's the convection effect of getting stuff out of there. If corrosion's already started, that's one thing, but I know with a lot of these, and you'll see later in this one, this has a coating of plastic. It's all over the outside. It's like they clear coated it. But if you look closely, computer chips are only half covered, the relay's only half covered, and it's not a complete seal, but most of the flats are. So if you see a car getting water and the computer be okay, you can thank either a sealed box or you can thank that coating. If you have to rework a board like that, it's a pain in the butt. That's another story for another video. And then you put an air conditioning valve in the top of it, put your computers in it, close it up, and then run a vacuum on it. Pull it down to 20 or 30 inches of mercury. Those are the metrics that we use to measure vacuum, and then let it sit. Whenever pressure decreases, evaporation happens. If I were to take a syringe full of water and then pull back on it real hard, you would see it boil. You can boil water at even cold temperatures, even though the boiling point of water is 100 degrees Celsius or 212 degrees Fahrenheit. You can boil it at much lower temperatures, or even when it's cold, by decreasing the pressure enough. So if we create a low pressure environment, it actually pulls the moisture out because it evaporates it. It just goes straight to gas and it gets pulled out with the pump. The mineral aspect of the situation is one of the hardest because, as I said at the beginning of the video, distilled water doesn't conduct electricity at all. But if you have water with that mineral in it and it lays a film of minerals that are semiconductors or conductive, then you have a problem. Salt water is very conductive. Your saliva is salty. When you put a 9-volt battery on your tongue, it kind of zaps you a little bit because your skin has like, I think it's like 100,000 ohms. So it takes a high voltage or a high pressure to be able to electrocute your skin. But with the salt and water on your tongue, it's very easy. The next thing I want to talk about, we've talked about engines and transmissions a little bit, But as soon as you run these with the water in it, that pickup tube's going to circulate it and it gets all over in there. An engine, if you ingest water through the intake, it is not the kiss of death that a lot of mechanics say it is, but it sure can be. I have a video that's called "What Does Hydrolock Mean?" where I show an engine block that is cracked on a Toyota 4Runner from a guy driving it through the water. As opposed to having a snorkel that takes air from above the car down to here. You'll see all kinds of Jeeps, trucks, even Humvees driving through water with snorkels. Water can get in through the exhaust pipe up to the engine, but it's less likely. But water can definitely get in the engine through either poor venting. If you have a bad PCV hose, water can go in through that. Or if you have a bad oil cap seal, water can rush in through there over time. If a car goes into water, the sooner you pull it out, the less opportunity it has to bubble air out and have water rush in. As for snorkels, who needs them? There's a lot of things that you can do if you know that you have to evacuate and you want your car to be secure. I see this McLaren P1 blowing up Instagram where everybody's posting it in the water, and the guy in previous posts, he puts in there hurricane supplies. He knows a hurricane's coming, and in a previous post, his car's at the shop. And basically, if you were to have your car up on a lift, as long as the roof of the building survived, it wouldn't matter what the flooding is, it's up out of the water. Most of the trucks survived. One of the big reasons I'm doing this video is I was getting a bunch of questions about this kind of stuff, and rather than responding and typing this a whole bunch of times, I was talking to Neil Richardson of Arcadia, Florida, and I committed to doing a video. He had a little Chevy car that had a bunch of water in the fuse block, and the big thing for him was the corrosion. I wanted to get this up sooner, but I've been super busy. But then if people are asking me these questions anyway, it makes the most sense and it's the most efficient to get it put up. But going down the list, if you want to prepare, instead of getting hurricane supplies, get it to high ground. Get it inclined so that most of your computers and things are around upper and lower dashboard and in the seat and whatnot. If you only have to replace a body control module or something in the back, it's a lot more doable. And then your engine and all that stuff, it's all up in the air. So I don't know, like that berm in your yard, put the front of the car up on there. You know, make it look like it's Georgia squat minus having all the the wheel well gap. Battery, another thing you can do is absorb glass mat is what it is. The vented batteries, they can get excess water and mineral in them, and that can ruin them. Fabrics. So you have, I think it's called jute. Now they use all kinds of denim materials, leftover scraps from making Levi's and whatnot. That stuff, if you pull that out, pull your seats out because they're pinning it down, get that stuff out and spread it out so that it can dry, then you don't have all the contamination of all of that kind of stuff. Same with your seats. If you can get some sun or some heat on those, it'll make all the difference in not having to replace them. Corrosion happens over time. You can have water in your PCM and you can have a teeny little speck of corrosion. We've all seen this on our battery terminals where we have a little bit of corrosion and then it expands and spreads, eats through the metal, and that takes time. It may take a year, it may take 2 years, but over time that corrosion will get stuff. So you have more time to worry about that. One of the things that you can do, especially with computers, is if this is disconnected from a power supply and you have clean water, you can flush these. I mean, if it's already been submerged in water, that damage is done. You can flush these or brush them with a toothbrush, and if they have a capacitor or whatever, oftentimes that'll discharge when the water's on them anyway. What damage is done is going to be done. But flush all of the mineral stuff, all the corrosion stuff off, and then do that technique. All right, time. The sooner you get stuff dried out and get it taken care of and clean, the best. Slimer. Basically, this turns into a gooey slime that gives off water vapor, basically, that causes corrosion. and then it also causes steam, basically. When it gets hot, you get that steam, or if it's immersed in a hydraulic line, now it can't shift, the transmission can't shift well. In the engine, oil's used as a shock absorber as well as a lubricant. It can't do either of those properties or those functions very well with water in it. So, and that slime sticks and just gets all over. It's really hard to get rid of and get back because it doesn't flow back to the oil pan as easily once it's been mixed and run. So before running it, make sure that you don't do that. Jeep versus Geo. A lot of off-road vehicles, they know that people are going to be in the water with it, and so there's more attention given to sealing things off, and also drainage. A lot of Jeeps they'll have, and cars as well, in the trunk you'll have a little plug where you can pull a plug there, you can pull a plug in front of or behind the seat mounts and get the water to drain out of the car. Geo Metros, I noticed on those, the flood ones that I've seen, you see how there's all these gaps and it's not sealed up very well? I mean, this is just rattling. The green board is literally right in through that crack. It's just inside of there. But I notice in those cheaper cars, they don't go to the lengths to make it hard for water to get in, whether it's a fuse block or a computer or anything. They just don't try as hard, it seems. So I'll pull this off, and there you are. There's no rubber grommet, there's no seal there at all. So this is from the late 90s. I know a lot of newer cars, in order to have better insurance rates and stuff, it's just a box. You could take this out and blow dry it. You see these things here where there's 3 lines? If those are blown out, then this is going to be no good until you solder in a new one. It's got clear coat, kind of a plastic coating over everything. If you see any resistors that are blown out or this is blown out, you can buy these things from a computer store by reading the label of what's on it. You can Google those things and you can actually repair these too. But the biggest thing, and this is just a relay, just like on a car, any other relay. These are really hollow. If you want to prepare your car, this one's got a bunch of plastic sealing it down, but you can actually take epoxy and seal around the outside of stuff like that. On your Jeep or your off-road rig, there's a lot of things that you can do to prevent corrosion from even getting in there to begin with, but a lot of the newer, more expensive cars do it. The caveat to that is, say you've got the McLaren P1 or a Mercedes or something like that. This computer from a wrecking yard you can get pretty cheap. The cruise control one, you can maybe get it for 50 bucks or 100 bucks even. Some of these more rare cars, you're not going to be able to find that, and it's going to be a whole lot more money. So if your car goes in the water, my thing is, and I've said it in that video I made in 2011, I'll leave a link below, but why you don't want a flood car is you could have corrosion on this that's slowly eating away the metal, and you may not see symptoms of it for 2 years or a year and a half, and then all of a sudden you've got to pay all this money. If you're broke and you don't have full coverage, go ahead and fix it. You know, get a couple of years use out of the car. If you can be real thorough and go over the electronics, flush it with water. A lot of this is coated in plastic and it'll be fine anyway. Instead of doing the seal here, they have in a way sealed the whole thing with that clear coat shiny stuff, but it only does so much. If you have any questions for me, please leave comments or questions in the comments below. I do go through my comments, but when you ask a question, even if I don't answer it, I've got a lot of mechanics that subscribe to my channel, and I'm really appreciative for the help that they give me in fielding questions and helping you guys out. That's the whole point of why I started my channel to begin with. I didn't do ad sharing or partnership. I think I was invited 3 times, and I didn't want to have commercials on my videos. I'm not going to do any commercials on this one for probably the first week, so that anybody that needs this information doesn't have to wade through frickin' commercials. Thanks for watching my videos, thanks for subscribing, and thanks for clicking the bell. There's more to come.
Bonus footage at the end.